my name is Lucas Wehle. I use he, him, his pronouns, and I am the Trans Services Division Manager at Metro Inclusive Health. I'm super excited to do this training. Y'all look like a fun bunch by your comments and stuff. This should be fun. So just a heads up before we get started, this is usually a much longer presentation. We have condensed it. So I am going to do my best to get through this content as quickly as possible. So some of this stuff might be kind of brief, especially things that you really just don't need to get caught up in. It's really more about knowing how to communicate with your clients, knowing how to respect people in the community and all of that. Big push on not assuming things, etc. Okay. So we're going to make it as general as we can to get through the content. And then Leigh is actually, excuse me, going to jump in at the end and go over some things more specific to event planning and weddings, since that's her field with you all. So mine's going to be more general LGBTQ plus diversity and inclusion. Okay. Leigh, did you want to say anything before I get started? I'm sorry, I forgot you had said you had wanted to.
No problem at all. I just wanted to say hi to everyone, and I'm looking forward to seeing you all again. Lucas and I are both with Metro Inclusive Health. Originally, I'm the event planner and fundraising coordinator for Metro Inclusive Health, and I've been currently working on all of our social media, creative content creation, creative writing, things along those lines. We have a 5,000 square foot venue here in St. Pete that can host weddings, meetings, anything along those lines. We also have meeting spaces here, as well as breakout spaces with full tech integration. And next year, we are scheduled to finish construction on the German American Club, where we will expand our Tampa location into another 5,000 square foot venue space that will be perfect for weddings. Beautiful balcony, beautiful greenery, so lots of parking on site. And again, it will be fully integrated with tech. So I look forward to hosting every one of y'all at an event in the future. So Lucas, you want to get started?
Awesome, thank you. So like I said, it's going to be our LGBTQ plus diversity inclusion training. I also will let you know that if you have any questions as we go through, I'll try to stop here and there and double check with you, but I can only see like 4 of you in the pane here. So feel free to unmute yourself and holler out at me. I'll try to listen out, and I'll pause for a few seconds here and there so I can check in, okay? I'm aware that I talk very fast. I will try to be as calm as possible. I am also a trans man, so I will share some of my own experience as a trans person throughout this presentation. Also open to questions regarding that. Again, I will try to keep things brief though, okay? So a little bit about Metro Inclusive Health. We've been around for about 27 years now. We were founded in 1992, started offering services in 93. We really developed out of the need for someone to do HIV services, case management for folks who were living with HIV and newly diagnosed back in the 80s when no one would, or sorry, back in the early 90s when no one was was treating those patients. And through that, we were obviously seeing a lot of people that identify within the LGBTQ plus community. And so we naturally developed an LGBT community center, supportive programs, things like that. And since then, in the past 5 or 10 years, we've grown immensely. So we developed our health center back in 2014. And in 2018, I actually created the division that I manage, called the Trans Services Division, where we have over 1,000 trans patients now in care with us for HRT services alone, which is hormone replacement therapy to medically transition. So our division is available to help any trans person with any resources they need, internal, external, etc. And other than that, we have over 100 programs and services, and we are the second largest LGBTQ plus center in the United States at this time. All right, so why this is important and how this is really applicable to specifically to what you all do is because there was a study that was done that shows the consumer buying power of the LGBTQ plus community. And this was, I think, in 2018, there was $917 billion, okay, in this industry. So, you know, if you think about it, if any of you are around the Tampa Bay area in St. Pete, you know, there are a lot of LGBTQ plus owned businesses. We have specific districts, even like Ybor and Grand Central in St. Pete, that are LGBTQ plus owned businesses. That being said, in your specific field, obviously you see people of all kinds getting married, people of all walks of life. You're gonna have LGBTQ plus weddings. You might have trans couples getting married, or a couple where one of them is trans or transitioning. You might have same-sex couples, same gender-loving couples. It could be a lot of different things. So making sure that you are as inclusive as possible and know how to talk with your clients and really help walk them through their event planning, whatever the event that is, especially if it's a wedding, is really important, because a lot of LGBT people struggle to find businesses that are not only businesses that are inclusive, but also, especially when they're trying to have a special event or a special day like their wedding day, finding someone who is going to respect them and really give them the treatment and the care that they deserve to have a great day and a great time, right? Excuse me. So the reason why this is important, obviously, increase sales, revenues, word of mouth, right? So if you are a business that is known for being inclusive of the LGBT community, especially if you're like a health center and somebody goes there and has a positive experience, as a trans person, I'm going to be telling everyone. But it also goes to say the opposite, okay? So if we have a negative experience, we talk, we share with people, hey, this person posted something that was, homophobic or transphobic or racist even, things like that, right? And so we talk about these things because we care about where our money goes and who we give our business to. And especially when, we're working for having a special event or a special day, we obviously don't want to be working with someone who is not going to be really treating us with all due respect, right? And then it also goes to say that you might have LGBTQ plus identified employees. So making sure that you are inclusive and you're creating a safe environment, which is affirming of all people, regardless of their identities, is also super, super important. These are some examples of some real life negative headlines and social reviews of things that have actually happened in the past like 5 or so years. A lot of these were kind of in response to marriage equality passing. So because marriage equality passed, there were people who were kind of acting out in different ways to show that they don't support marriage equality, such as refusing to bake the cake for the same-sex wedding, etc. Something else that became very big after marriage equality passed was kind of a negative, some discrimination towards trans people, especially specifically regarding bathrooms and public accommodations. And so you'll see on here, there's one saying a woman was kicked out of the bathroom or of the restaurant because she used the bathroom or refused to show her ID to use the bathroom that aligned with her gender identity. And this actually, not so fun fact, is legal in 3 states in the United States: Arkansas, Tennessee, and North Carolina. So these are real life things that have happened. And again, you probably don't want to be one of these businesses, right? All right, give me 1 second. I need to. Somebody, sorry, we got some background noise here. Got it. Okay, cool. All right, perfect. All right, so what we're going to talk about now is we're going to break down the different components of an identity. So we're going to talk about sexual orientation versus gender identities, how those differ, some stereotype things, expression, gender expression, and then how some people's sexual orientation, romantic orientation even might differ. We're going to go over in general, again, very briefly, what the LGBTQ plus acronym means, but we're not going to go into that in a lot of detail, and I'll explain why that's really not important once we get there. More of just for you to know a little bit more of some of the commonly used identities that you might hear within the community. And this is where I'm going to pause and check on y'all and make sure you don't have any questions as we go through, okay? So the first thing that's really important and very commonly misunderstood is that gender identity is not a sexual orientation. So the fact that I told you earlier that I'm trans, that does not tell you anything about who I'm attracted to. So if we were in a room, I'd ask you this and kind of test you about it. But just because I told you I'm trans, you don't know who I'm attracted to. So you don't know my sexual orientation, okay? Because those are two completely separate things. So it's commonly misunderstood, especially in my case where I'm a very masculine person, that I transitioned to be straight, right? Or that because I'm a masculine trans man, I'm attracted to women, right? Or only attracted to women. But that's not actually the case for me. My sexual orientation is a little bit fluid, and I am open to other gender identities. And so it's important to understand that those things do differ, but that also just because I identify within the community as a trans person, it doesn't mean that I am gay, right? We use the term gay as an umbrella term, but that really is a sexual orientation, okay? So making sure we're using that terminology correctly, and just making sure that we understand that there are a lot of identities underneath the umbrella term, or the acronym, and so making sure we're referring to it as the LGBTQ plus community or any variation of that that you're comfortable with. That plus is really important because it signifies that there's tons of other identities that we're not listing, because we couldn't possibly just sit here and list every identity that exists. We'd be here for years, and then we still wouldn't have every identity because somebody might be creating one right now as we speak, right? So it's all self-identified, okay? So what defines somebody's sexual orientation? Again, this could differ for some people. They might experience attraction to different people, or different attraction between their romantic orientation and or their sexual orientation. I like to think of this as romantic and or emotional attraction, and sexual and or physical, because there are some people who don't experience sexual attraction, or might just prefer different language with that. So when we're talking about romantic or emotional attraction or orientation, we're talking about the attraction that you experience creating a bond with someone, creating a connection, not necessarily having anything to do with physicality, if there is or not, okay? And for some people that differs. Some people experience romantic connections or emotional attraction to other humans and don't experience sexual connections or sexual attractions to other humans. That can be someone's experience. But if not, it could differ. And again, who they're physically and or sexually attracted to might be different, okay? Not super common, but it does happen. A lot of people, I say it's common, it's not normal, but it's common for people to be physically attracted to the same type of person that they find a romantic or an emotional connection with. Usually those go hand in hand for a lot of people. I just want to check in really quick and see if anybody has any questions about sexual orientation or the difference between sexual orientation and gender identity. Okie dokie. And if you do have a question and you can't figure out how to unmute yourself, feel free to type in the chat and I'll stop and grab your question, okay? I might even tell you that we're about to cover it. All right, so the other different components of an identity is we're going to talk a lot about gender identity, okay? So the reason why a lot of these presentations are very heavy on gender identities or topics of the trans community and gender identities is because that has everything to do with how we communicate with a person right from the start, right? So you can be having a conversation with someone at the grocery store or a stranger or a friend, and you really don't necessarily need to know who they're attracted to. That might not be relevant in most conversations, but you do need to know how to refer to them, right? You need to know what their name is if you're talking about them. You probably need to know their pronouns, so how to refer to them other than their name, which we'll cover in a minute. And so that's why gender identity is very important, and it's very important not to assume things. So that being said, there are 3 different components of what makes up one's gender. And the first is the sex that one is assigned at birth, okay? So typically we usually only hear of male or female when a baby is born. The doctor will say, oh, it's a boy or it's a girl. But there is actually another option. You don't hear about it a lot, but if you were familiar with the term hermaphrodite and what that definition is and means, you can apply basically the same definition to the word intersex. And that is now the updated, most inclusive terminology to refer to anyone who was born with any form of ambiguous sex characteristics, okay? So that's what intersex means, and it's a lot more common than you think. There are about 1 in 2,000 babies that are born intersex, and that's just what's reported. Some people don't even know they're intersex because it might be their sex chromosomes that vary, and those are things we don't a lot of times know, and we definitely don't test for most of the time, okay? So male, female, or intersex is what you're assigned at birth. Has nothing to do with your gender identity, and for some people, they don't align, okay? So you have your sex assigned at birth, and then you have your gender identity. So gender identity is in your head. That's why we have the brain here, okay? So this is self-identified. This is how you identify. This is how you even sometimes present yourself to the world. That's more expression, okay? So some gender identities, some examples of some gender identities are cisgender and transgender. I got your question. I'll answer in just a second. So the term trans or transgender is used for someone whose gender identity does not align with the sex they were assigned at birth. So for example, I told you earlier that I am a trans man. What that means is that I was assigned female at birth, but I identify as male. And I personally have medically and socially transitioned to move about the world as a man. I'm known as Lucas, and people who don't need to know don't even need to know, right? So that's my experience as a trans person. It doesn't mean that in order to identify or be validated in my gender identity as a man, that I had to physically or medically transition, but that's my experience. I'm gonna pause really quick and go back to intersex. Somebody had a question if hermaphrodite was a negative term to use this time. And I will say, yeah, hermaphrodite is kind of known as more of like a derogatory term now, or just a less inclusive term for the community. So the most up-to-date would be intersex. Intersex is okay to use and is respectful. Thank you for that question. So going back to gender identities, we had trans or transgender. Okay, trans is just more shortened. It's more of the umbrella term used nowadays. Still means the same thing. Someone whose gender identity does not align with the sex they were assigned at birth. And then I'm gonna skip ahead and then come back, because this next slide has the definition that I want you to look at for cisgender. And this term is made up of two parts. So the prefix cis, C-I-S, means to belong with or on the same side of, okay? So when I say cis, I'm not talking about my siblings, although I do have two, and they are both cis, okay? So what cisgender means is someone whose gender identity aligns with the sex they were assigned at birth, okay? So so for example, my mother was assigned female at birth. She identifies as female, and so therefore her gender identity would be categorized as cis or cisgender, okay? We don't walk around telling people, oh, you're cisgender, right? Like, we don't walk around outing people that they're trans. It's just the word is important because we need to have an opposite term to define gender identities when we're talking about the trans community, instead of saying trans and normal or trans and not trans. That way we're not creating any othering or ostracization. So just like we have the terms gay and straight, or heterosexual and homosexual, we have cisgender and transgender, or cis and trans, okay? Does that make sense? I want to check in with everybody. If you have a question, go ahead and unmute yourself. Awesome. I'm sorry if you can hear my cat screaming in the background. So the terms that, like I said, that we're going to use a lot are transgender and cisgender, or trans and cis. So if I'm saying those are what those mean. If you need a reminder, just give me a heads up, okay? Again, these are all self-identified. So my gender identity is how I identify. So I identify as trans. I self-identify as a man. It's not somebody else's place to tell me what my gender identity is. And it does not have to align with the sex that I was assigned at birth. And then gender expression can also differ from gender identity. So also is self-defined. Most of the time, people express themselves in a way that aligns with their gender identity. So if you're a man, a lot of times you present yourself as masculine. You want to be seen as a man. You want to be seen as masculine. But it doesn't mean that if you don't, or if I were to wear a dress or something, that would be wrong, or that's not a correct way of expressing my gender, or that makes me any less of a man. Because really, it's just an inanimate object that we gender, right? Clothing. So that's what gender expression is. It's typically clothing, mannerisms, any way that you are expressing yourself outwardly to the world or to others to express your gender. All right, we already talked about cisgender. Okay, so the LGBTQ plus acronym as we know it today, this is still not, even as that we're looking at now, is not as, does not have every identity in it. And I apologize, I just remember there's a typo on this and I did not edit it. So the LGBTQ letters are what you hear most often. So you might be most familiar with the terms lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans or transgender, and queer. I'm gonna go over those a little bit more in a little bit more depth here. The other ones that you might not hear of as often or you might not be as familiar with, there's a non-binary umbrella term that is used for anyone whose gender identity falls outside of what most people identify as strictly male or strictly female, okay? There's also people who might be questioning. They might not know their sexual orientation or their gender identity. Usually they're not questioning forever. They certainly could be, but typically that's kind of them finding out who they are, discovering who they are and where they identify. Asexual, agender, two-spirit, pansexual, polyamorous. I'll kind of take those. If anybody has any specific questions about them, I'll answer them. But that's what all of these letters here stand for, okay? So we have lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, questioning, intersex, asexual, agender, two-spirit, that's the 2S, pansexual, and polyamorous. I'm gonna pause for a second because we have some questions. Okay, so I have a question of, is it okay to associate, for example, men with masculine and women with feminine, or is it something that we should be that should be abolished? If that's making sense. So this is actually a really good question. Technically, no. Yeah, we don't want to associate men with masculinity. However, and the opposite. However, it is common, right? That, you know, most men do express themselves masculinely and most women do express themselves femininely. But I would say, I guess, just be open to the fact that not everyone does, and to not, you know, necessarily be stuck to that, if that makes any sense. But there's nothing wrong with it, I would say. So I'm going to explain two-spirit, and then someone has a question or a comment about a polyamorous wedding, so I'll cover that a little bit as well. I think we're all pretty familiar with lesbian, gay, bisexual, and I've covered trans. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about queer and how it's used now, and then I'll take those two questions, okay? So queer in the past was used as a derogatory term. Absolutely still could be a derogatory term if you are referring to someone as a queer or calling them queer. However, you will hear people say the queer community. I teach that we shouldn't say the queer community as a whole, as the LGBTQ plus community, because that word does have trauma, hold trauma for some people, especially older folks, and can be triggering. And some people just don't choose to use that word and haven't reclaimed it. But it is an identity for some people. Some people use the term queer to define their gender identity and or their sexual orientation as having a fluidity to it. Okay, so I actually kind of use the term queer to define my sexual orientation because it has a fluidity to it, and I don't really think about it that much. I don't really care to be like, oh, I'm pansexual or I'm whatever. I don't really care to put that much thought into it. I just love, you know, people, and if I am attracted to a person, I'm attracted to them. So I just kind of say, I'm queer. I'm part of the community. So that's kind of how I use that term, and that's a very common usage of that word nowadays. All right, let me open up these questions. One of them was two-spirit. So two-spirit is actually a cultural term that is used for some tribes in the Native American culture to basically define their folks who identify as trans. So the way that they explain that is, or define that definition, is that they basically acknowledge the sex they were assigned at birth and their gender identity as two spirits within themselves. And so that's where that 2S or that two-spirit comes from. That's what that term means. So someone had the question about polyamorous wedding. Any tips we can offer to be inclusive? Any traditions you might have seen that I recommend? That's actually a really good question. I'm not sure about traditions, but I do have quite a few friends who are poly and also have had weddings, and I've seen some really cool things. In my experience, I have seen a handful of polyamorous relationships where one person or two people are married, and then they end up having an additional person that they end up getting married to, or one of them ends up getting married to another person. So the wedding is still kind of traditional in the sense that there's two people getting married, and then their partners are there with them. They're kind of standing up there with them. That's what I've seen most of the time. If there's more than one person getting married at the ceremony, I'm not really an events person, so I will kind of let Leigh maybe take that question. Leigh, did you want to answer that now, or do you want to?
Sure. So in terms of a polyamorous wedding, I think the biggest thing to keep in mind is paying attention to your interpersonal relationships and interactions with all parties involved. So instead of referring to them as couple, if they're not a couple, refer to them as whatever their chosen pronouns are, or refer to them as your group that's getting married. But in terms of having these planning conversations, you want to make sure to give equal attention to the details to equal parties involved. So in the course of planning a wedding, oftentimes it seems as though one person kind of comes out as the main lead and like, well, this is what I want. This is, I want pink fluffy peonies, and I want this kind of tablecloth, and I want this. And the other person that's involved in the couple is just like, oh yeah, whatever they want is fine with me. So try not to take that approach with polyamorous couples, because it may not necessarily be that case. And somebody says Tiger King.
Yeah, I love that. Don't judge polyamorous relationships by Tiger King. I could not agree more, right? Okay, thank you so much, Leigh.
Yeah, there's a lot of good resources on polyamory online as well, and I'm happy to share that to y'all if y'all want to reach out to us.
Absolutely. And then I had another question. Sorry, I scrolled down. Someone said, is queer derogatory? And so like I said, it is absolutely a derogatory term if it were used to call someone queer. If you were to say, you're queer, or you're a queer, or if someone is referring to the community in a derogatory way, absolutely derogatory. But like I said, it still could be offensive to people in general, so it could be kind of triggering. So again, just keep in mind it's self-identified. And the reason why I kind of not brushed over, but told you really don't need to get too invested or overwhelmed by these terms is because they're all self-identified. So at the end of the day, one, there's not going to be a test at the end of this. And two, you don't need to be able to write down textbook definitions for all of these, because not only do they vary so drastically depending on how the person experiences their gender identity and or sexual orientation, they also might not apply to the people that you think fit inside those boxes or match that definition. So for example, you might have two women getting married who don't identify as lesbians. Okay, they might identify as gay, they might prefer the term gay, they might not identify really within the community at all, they just happen to be the only two women. And that's something, I think they muted themselves. And so that's something that happens. So something to be cognizant of when you are assuming people's identities. I would say don't. So okay. All right, any other questions about the LGBTQ plus acronym? Awesome. Where's my cursor? Here we go. All right, so pronouns are really, really important. This is one thing that you really have to practice not assuming. I would encourage you to never assume anyone's pronouns, but it's really not socially acceptable yet to ask the cashier at Publix what their pronouns are. People just don't do it, and people just don't usually even know what pronouns are because we haven't talked about them in grade school unless you're in the LGBT community. So I would love to tell you to do that, but I'm not going to, push you out of your comfort zone to do something that is not going to make sense to a lot of people. What I do encourage you to do is, especially when you're not sure, either ask how to refer to somebody by asking what their name is, or introducing yourself using your name and pronouns, and then hopefully they follow up. If somebody gives you their name and you have no idea what their pronouns are, and it would absolutely be, a shot in the dark to guess, don't do it. Just call them their name. And somewhere in that conversation, if there's another person there, you're going to learn their pronouns because someone's going to refer to them in third person, and you're going to get those pronouns. So, it usually will happen very quickly and very naturally, but there are ways that you can ask, and we'll go over those a little bit more here in the next couple slides. The most common pronouns are he, him, his, she, her, hers, and they, them, theirs. They, them, theirs is the most common form of a gender neutral pronoun that we use in the English language. We were taught as kids that this is not a singular pronoun. That is incorrect. It has always been a singular pronoun. I'll tell you, it's been a singular pronoun since Shakespeare's time. So it's very important to kind of, get on board with that and to practice those pronouns if you're not familiar with them. So how you would use they, them, theirs pronouns in a sentence. If you were talking to me and those are my pronouns, you would say, they drove to the market, they waved to me, or I waved to them in the parking lot, the yellow truck was theirs, okay? There is a resource called practicewithpronouns.com you can go to and type in, choose different pronouns. There's a bunch of different gender neutral pronouns on there as well if you're interested. And you can practice using those in a sentence and getting familiar with the different tenses, and it'll let you know, what you got correct and whatnot. It'll populate different like paragraphs and sentences you can practice those with. Oops, I didn't even mean to do that, but I guess we're ready. Hold on. Yep, there we go. All right, so again, when you're not sure anything about a person, you really should avoid assuming. We really should avoid assuming in general. We know what it does, right? But especially in your field, something that this really is applicable to is when you're not sure about the partner or partners, when you're talking to maybe one of the the members of the wedding, and you don't know who their partner is yet. They haven't stated it in an email, they haven't said it on the phone. And so, I would either ask, what is your partner's name? Or how does your partner identify? Or, ask something about their partner, or ask how to refer to their partner if you don't know, or wait for them to give you that information. Don't assume that if it's a man, he's getting married to a woman. If it's a woman, she's getting married to a man, and vice versa. So just keep that in mind. And also, just in general, regardless of work, just talking to people and interacting with people in general, really be cautious of assuming someone's gender and their pronouns. Okay. You can always refer to someone as neutral if you don't know. You can say, oh, their partner is blah 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 blah, if you don't know anything about them yet, or their partner will be here in a minute. And then naturally, you're probably going to get the information you need when you have that meeting. But in the meantime, just be really cautious of assuming. And make sure that you're open to learning. The community is always evolving, new terms, things are coming out all the time. Not to overwhelm you, just keep up with the best you can, and make sure that you are being as neutral as possible to make sure that you have an inclusive way of approaching things. No, I did not say there. I said there wouldn't be a quiz. Oh, I get it. Y'all are funny. You're trying to throw me off my game. All right, and then we have a couple other questions or comments. I have an intro question for wedding clients, and that asks pronouns. Love that. If I haven't met with them and asked yet, it says both your names and preferred gender pronouns. Love that. I would, if you don't mind, just a little bit of an edit. I would prefer to take off the preferred. We are just saying gender pronoun. We are just saying what are your pronouns, right? So name used, pronouns, etc. Love that though. Great job. And any other? Nope, no other questions or comments. Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. I love that. So that's a great way to do that. That's basically what we do for our intake forms and stuff. So again, I'm not familiar with what you all have as far as that stuff goes, but it sounds like something very similar. And I think that's a great way of asking. It's really good to get that information right up front, so you don't have to worry about assuming or beating around the bush or figuring that out in an awkward or uncomfortable way for you. Awesome. Oops, trying to switch. All right, here we go. So we really already went over this, but if you can't tell someone's gender, it's okay to ask. It can be uncomfortable for both parties. So if you don't want to ask, you can just introduce yourself with your name and pronouns. You can politely follow it up with, what are your pronouns? Sometimes you have to explain that to them. A lot of times I'll ask people, what are your pronouns? And they really don't know what I'm talking about. So I have to say, do you want me to refer to you as he, she, they, right? And then they pretty immediately jump on and know, what they want me to call them other than their name, okay? If you make a mistake, just apologize and move on. Make sure that you correct yourself and try not to do it again. Try your best to not do it again. But the number one thing you want to do is, don't make it about yourself, right? It can be very easy to get caught up in, oh my goodness, I'm so sorry. I just misgendered you. I didn't mean to do that. But really that draws, moves the guilt to like the other person, kind of feeling bad that, they have different pronouns that you're used to. And that's not how we want them to feel. Okay. Thanks for the comments about my cat. He's the devil. Earlier, he knocked over that thing he was standing on 3 times while I was in a meeting. So, yep, he's talking back now. All right, so, oops, I already said this, sorry. Thought it moved on. Oh, okay. So actually, we're gonna move now. I did pretty good on timing. I'm surprised I got through all of that in this time. We're gonna move now into talking. Lee's gonna talk more about the this topic specifically relating to what you all do, because that's more her and forte. But I'm going to mute myself, and then we'll take questions after she's done.
All right, so I'm going to share my screen. Lucas, can you switch over the host? Perfect.
I stopped sharing mine. Are you able to now, or do I have to do something?
You have to switch me over to the host.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Sorry. 1 second.
And Katie, can you mute yourself because your dogs are...
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, Lee, I'm having a hard...
Okay.
Here we go. Gotcha. Okay.
Got it?
Make host. Okay. Perfect.
Okay, perfect. Okay. So I'll go back to here. All right. So I am going to cover how this specifically relates to wedding planning or event planning in general, just because a lot of these can fall into both categories. So go over some pertinent points and perilous pitfalls in planning LGBTQ plus weddings. A lot of this does bleed over into the event world as well. It's not just a gay wedding anymore. Just like Lucas said, in the beginning we were faced with a lot of commitment ceremonies, but we want to use more inclusive terminology instead of qualifying a wedding as a gay wedding or a lesbian wedding. It's just a wedding. Oftentimes when I talk with my couples who are non-hetero, they just want to have a wedding just like everyone else has been dreaming of their entire lives. So as you can kind of treat everyone as equally as possible. That's all that pretty much anybody ever wants. There are many other types of unions, commitment ceremonies, and weddings as well as outside of the term gay wedding. If you have confirmed that your wedding is between 2 people who identify as the same gender or the same sex, then you can use the term same-sex wedding. So just making sure that you're not referring to all non-hetero weddings as a gay wedding. Use the couple's proper pronouns. The biggest thing that I think that I've faced in my career of planning LGBTQ weddings is to prepare yourself for these emotionally heavy conversations that could potentially pop up. Oftentimes, one or both of your couples may have a tumultuous relationship with their family or some of their family members, to the point where their family might be refusing to come to the wedding. So your conversations that normally go very well with your hetero couples of, well, do you want to dance with this person? Who do you want this person to walk you down the aisle? Those are very difficult conversations to have. I've had many tearful sessions with my couples talking about these things. So just kind of prepare yourself emotionally and kind of prepare how to deal with these things that potentially may come up. What about the mechanics of the wedding? So oftentimes you'll kind of get these questions of, well, who wears what? Who walks down the aisle first? Well, it's whatever they want. So who walks down the aisle first? Well, it depends. You may have 2 women who are getting married that identify as women, and both of them are, wearing the same dress or a similar dress, or both wearing dresses, both identify more feminine. In these cases, I leave it up to the couple of whoever wants to walk down the aisle first. I've had instances where 2 couples walk down the aisle together, I've had an instance where they went in alphabetical order of who walked down the aisle. And then I've had other instances where both people came from the outside of the wings and walked in together and met together at the end, which is really beautiful. Same thing applies with what side does the person stand on? We'll ask them, what side do you want to stand on? Some people have better sides to their faces, and so a lot of times that will play into the decision. But just have these very open conversations with them. How do you introduce the newlyweds? Again, ask them. Especially, this comes into play with the DJ, and this is why I have such very heart-to-heart conversations with my DJs or my bands in saying, make sure you are paying very close attention when you are introducing this couple, because a lot of times people just get into kind of the regular just turn and burn kind of wedding mindset, and will accidentally say introducing the new Mr. and Mrs. when it's two Mrs. That's bad. Don't do that. So make sure you're not only having these conversations with your couple, but you're having these conversations with all of the vendors that are involved too, and reiterate the pronouns, reiterate what they wish to be referred to as. What about the bouquet and garter throw? I've done these a number of different ways. So I've had it to where both my brides, I had two brides, and both of the brides threw the bouquet together, and it was a lot of fun. Same thing with the garter throw. Or you can just leave these things out completely, because in this day and age, what we're seeing a lot trending in the wedding industry is that not a lot of people are doing this anymore, because you might have a couple that has two single friends. And so in the middle of the wedding, you have two single friends on the dance floor with a spotlight on them being called out for being single. If that's the case, have these conversations with your couple ahead of time and say, do you even have a lot of single friends? Because if you don't put the spotlight on them, unless it's really meaningful and they just wanted to do the bouquet. An alternative to this may be like the anniversary dance that you can do as well. Who wears what? Whatever they want. Under no circumstances should you ever assume the gender role or gendered structure of a relationship. I can't tell you how many times I've heard the question, well, who's going to wear the dress? Well, both of them, or none of them, or one of them. It doesn't really matter. I participated in a really beautiful wedding where one of the brides wore this gorgeous dress, and then the other bride, who was a little bit more masculine, wore this stunning lace and Dupioni suit that was gorgeous. So we have some comments coming in. I always ask and let the couples express their thoughts, and then we talk through the logistics, the intro, the pronouns, the couple is the boss. That's honestly the best way to look at these things, because at the end of the day, the last thing you want to do is a misstep, because that misstep is going to play over and over and over again in people's heads, especially with LGBTQ couples, because at one point in time, even getting married was never a reality, or it was never a possibility. So your role as a planner or a vendor in the wedding. 1, decide if you want to be an inclusive vendor. If you don't, that's okay. Let that information be known. I think some of us in this industry know who are inclusive vendors and who are open to doing LGBTQ weddings, and some don't. It's kind of like tipping. If you don't believe in tipping at a meal, fine. Let your server know at the beginning of the meal instead of at the end of it. Because the last thing you want to do is to have somebody or have a couple call you up and ask you to do something for their wedding, or look to hire you as a vendor, and then you tell them no. And then that leaves a stain on their whole planning experience. Secondly, ask yourself, are you ensuring that you're an inclusive vendor? This starts with the first point of contact for your couple, which is your website. Think of the process that the couple goes through to inquire about your services. Are all of your quotes bride and groom? Or are they spouse 1 and spouse 2? Are they gender neutral? Does the language on your website reflect inclusivity? Does it let the couple know that is looking to hire you that you're an inclusive vendor. So all of these things are very important. Secondly, are you ensuring that your staff is also acting inclusively? I always really stress this with caterers because typically caterers have the most amount of staff on site, and they're the ones with the staff that have the most touch points with not only the couple, with the guests as well. So you have to take yourself and think outside of the couple and think about the guests that are in attendance as well. Even if it is a heterosexual wedding, you may still have LGBTQ people in attendance at the wedding, and you want to ensure that your staff are being inclusive and being as welcoming as possible to everyone there. It takes one singular off-note comment or innocent joke to take down an entire company. And I think now in the environment that we're in, we can all agree that the speed and efficacy of social media is incredibly powerful. Franklin Manor. I have seen companies go away in about 3 hours and completely dissolve in 3 hours. And once that social media hits, it spreads like wildfire. And it is very, very, very difficult to come back from. I have had this happen at some of my weddings as well, where it was a catering staff member say something really off, say something like really out of touch, and it was a question, but it was an extremely out of touch question, and I sent them back to the kitchen and said, "Don't come back on the floor." So it also takes one comment to completely ruin a couple's day. You can have the perfect, most beautiful wedding ceremony and most amazing reception, and if that couple hears one thing, it's like a black cloud that comes over their head. So as a planner, or if you're taking in the role of planning, most importantly, you are the protector and gatekeeper of your couple. So you want to make sure that you're screening all of your vendors before introducing them to your couple, making sure any of the estimates or any of the quotes that are coming in have the proper pronouns and the proper terminology in them, and you're not just like flying them out to the couple like, oh, here it is. Because the last thing you want is for your same-sex male couple to see bride and groom when it's really not bride and groom. I screen all of my quotes that come in before sending them to my couple to ensure this. Be mindful of the couple's identity of the wedding and the concept of the wedding. Make sure that you're recommending vendors that align with that concept and that design identity. The last thing that you would want to do is to recommend someone with a ton of fluffy pink peonies and just exploding in roses to a same-sex male couple who are both very masculine and want a masculine look to the wedding. And this is something that's kind of challenging. There's a few vendors out there that I've actually seen do a really good job at this and taking getting out of the mindset of the fluffy blush and gold weddings and getting into more of the modern masculine touch of things. It's a little bit of a challenge. Do your research on the couple's wishes and desires before your meeting. This kind of goes back to, don't just assume they're going to want fluffy flowers everywhere. If they're find out what their wishes are ahead of time, do some research ahead of time so that way you're prepared when you're walking into the meeting. Don't constantly refer to hetero weddings as regular weddings or traditional weddings. They're all weddings, no matter who is getting married. It's all a wedding. Do inform all of your staff working that event that they are working a non-hetero wedding. This is my own personal feelings. Because I've had this happen before. The last thing as a planner I would want is for somebody to have a server or some worker involved in the wedding that is doing whatever their role is in the wedding to have strong feelings against the couple, and it becomes an issue. So I always stress to my vendors ahead they know this is a same-sex wedding. Make sure they know this is a trans wedding. Make sure they know these are two women getting married. So, and if you don't agree with it, if you're not comfortable with it, that's fine. You can feel the way you feel. Don't schedule them.
Hey, Leigh, can I add something really quick?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I just want to kind of go back to some pronoun stuff and assuming stuff really quick. If you, especially when you have an LGBTQ plus wedding, I would encourage your staff to not go around, and I know sometimes it's hard, but to not go around and assume like, yes, sir, yes, ma'am, even though they're trying to be, have manners, because especially when it's an LGBTQ plus wedding, they probably have other LGBTQ plus friends. I mean, this really could go for all the time, obviously, but it's hard. So I just wanted to put that out there to be aware of that, because you could get in some really uncomfortable conversations.
Mm-hmm. So these are a lot of these too, especially in my part here, are personal feelings based on my personal experiences as a wedding planner over the years. So, and based on like what I've seen. And when in doubt, phone a friend. So I've had a couple of planners ask me, well, I just got my first same-sex wedding. It's two women. What do I do? And it's like, oh, don't panic. It's fine. I will happily answer all of your questions. If I don't know, I will refer you to someone else that will also be able to answer your questions, or I'll refer you to many resources. There never should be any problem in asking a question. No question is too ridiculous of a question or a dumb question. And I would rather us lean on each other for information rather than take that misstep and upset someone or offend someone or hurt somebody's feelings. So I think we have a couple of chats coming in, or a couple of questions. All right, so I can't remember where I heard this, and I know it doesn't apply to polyamorous relationships, but I thought it was beautiful. You're an equal team of two humans and get to hang out the rest of your lives. I have to say, some of the most touching and emotional weddings have been my same-sex or LGBTQ weddings. There is something about seeing two people who were best friends that turned into partners marry each other, and to see that basis of friendship just turn into this incredibly dynamic love between two people. It's moving. I don't think I've ever bawled more than during one of my more recent same-sex weddings. And it was because it was a very difficult family dynamic between one of the brides. She and her parents did not agree with the person that she chose to marry and were refusing to come to the wedding. So anytime we talked about family dances or who was going to walk down the aisle, it always ended up in a big, tissue fest. Hope we all cried together. And about 2 weeks before the wedding happened, she got the RSVP from her dad. And he didn't walk her down the aisle, and he didn't dance with her during the first dance, but he was there. He was present at the wedding, and he was participating. And everybody was kind of looking at each other wondering, was he going to dance with her? And about the second to last song, he went over to the DJ and requested this beautiful song and finally danced with his daughter. And it was probably the most moving thing I have ever seen in my entire life and as a parent. So I'm going to get a little emotional. So I think that's why, LGBTQ weddings to me just touch my heart, because they're so special, and it's so honoring to witness the love between two people and just to be honored to be a part of it. So like I said, when in doubt, phone a friend. I can post my information, or you can reach out to me anytime you need. I am always full of endless free advice for anyone that needs to ask. And also, this training right here, as it pertains to diversity, equity, and inclusion, is available to each and every one of you as a virtual or an in-person component as well. And Lucas can kind of speak a little bit more to that. But before we get to that, does anybody have any questions? Do we want to take everybody off of mute?
I'm going to read this one out loud. I have a wedding that is, I have a wedding that the groom is trans and identifies as a man. They have not mentioned anything to me. Should I ask? They both grew up with my kids. Oh, you mean like that you don't know that they're trans, or they don't know that you know they're trans? Okay, so yeah, I would encourage you not to say anything. You can always just make sure that you're being extra open so that they know you're a safe space if they choose to disclose that. But it's absolutely up to them if they want to disclose that. They might not even want to think about it or anything like that. And so I would just leave it at that. Yeah, good question though.
Mm-hmm. And to go off of that too, I did have a wedding that started out as two women in a same-sex, planning a same-sex wedding, and one of the brides made the decision to transition female to male during the course of the wedding planning. So when I was informed, of course I was supportive, but I made all of my vendors resend me quotes with the proper terminology. And then there were several calls to all of the vendors ahead of time going, make sure you're using male pronouns. Make sure you're using male pronouns. Did I mention use male pronouns? Make sure you're using male pronouns. So it really is like you have to put that at the forefront of your brain and kind of turn off your autopilot, especially with those of us that do a lot of weddings on a regular basis, and to pay attention to that because it's very easy to slip up, and that slip up sticks. So we have another question. What are other ways besides your website that you can promote yourself as an inclusive vendor without a portfolio of LGBTQ weddings? Your Instagram now, especially if you're in a creative field, a lot of couples are looking at their Instagram. The first question that I'll get is like, oh, can you send me their Insta? And I'm like, yes. So especially if you're in a visual field, you want to make sure your Instagram is inclusive. And especially not just inclusive of LGBTQ plus people, it's inclusive of diverse people from all walks of life. So you want to include, people of color, anything along those lines. Just make sure it's not filled with just a lot of blonde Barbie dolls marrying Kens. And if you don't have that, then that's okay. And just make sure you're putting that information out there.
Also make sure that and this goes for everything, and this is a diversity, presentation, so I will say, make sure that your images are diverse. Make sure you have all different types of people, all different types of bodies, all different types of races, all different types of couple or partner variations. That's really important, especially nowadays. If a person, even if I was to go on there and see all white people at a plate, I probably wouldn't give my business to them, to be honest, because to me that says that they don't really value diversity or really understand diversity, and I want to support somebody who does.
And one of my very best friends, she's Black, and she told me the other day, she's like, when I look at a panel of people, or when I look at a vendor, or when I look at a portfolio, if I don't see any Black people in there, or if I don't see any Black people on the panel, well then I have no interest because I'm not represented. And that really kind of rang true to me. So I would just keep that at the forefront. And yes, Regina, I think it was Regina that said, you can do styled shoots that include diversity. So if you don't actually have like those couples to put in your portfolio, consider styled shoots. You're starting to see like a lot of styled shoots now with people with alternative hair color and fantasy hair color, brides that are tattooed, couples that don't necessarily wear the same traditional like wedding dress and tuxedo. So think about those things when you're planning your styled shoots. Styled shoots can be one of your best resources in your back pocket, especially if you are in a creative, visually heavy field for your Instagram.
I'm responding to Sandra's right now.
Okay.
That way you have something in writing if that's what you prefer.
Oh, fantastic. Yeah.
Leigh, I don't know if you know, or Lucas, if you know, there was When I was working for a hotel last year, I believe that, is there a national organization where you can register as an LGBTQ friendly business? I feel like there's some sort of a designation you can sign up for, and I can't remember offhand.
Yeah, you can do that in a handful of places. The biggest one is the Human Rights Campaign, but I'm not really the biggest fan. And also keep in mind that there is a downside to that, in that, and not for you. I mean, it would be beneficial for you, no matter what. But for us, there are a lot of people who sign up for that stuff, and it doesn't mean they actually meet the 100% of whatever that they're supposed to, if they were to do a study for their employees. It just means that they want to look like they're inclusive, but at the end of the day, if they had a trans employee, would they actually navigate that correctly, or would they fire them? There's a lot of people on there who absolutely would fire their employee. So just keep that in mind. But for you all, I mean, yeah, you're on the side where all it can do is benefit you. But that's just something I want to put out there about that list. It's not really the best, if that makes any sense.
And if you want to book this training for you and your staff, we do give you inclusivity. We do give you collateral in media to use that shows that you have been through inclusivity training with Metro Inclusive Health. So it just kind of gives you one of those extra layers of accolades to your website to let those LGBTQ plus couples know that you have gone through this training, your staff has gone through this training. So it's a safe space. Lucas, can you tell everybody here a little bit more about booking and training and the affordability of it? Because it really is affordable.
Absolutely, yeah. So booking and training with us, it's usually much longer than this as well. We recommend scheduling for about an hour and a half to 2 hours, depending on how many people are there and how many questions there's going to be, etc. We can certainly tailor it specifically to your needs, but it is naturally usually longer than this anyways. Even the slides, we condensed it for this purpose. And the cost is $200 an hour up to, I think, 80 people. All this information is on our website as well. So, for example, if you did a standard training that we recommend about an hour and a half, and you had 50 people, it would be about $300 for your training. And it's very, very in-depth. It's even more in-depth than the one was today.
So, Regina, we have, is it okay to use hashtags and keywords to be found for inclusive vendors? Yes, it is, but make sure that you are truly inclusive, because the last thing you want to fall into is tokenism, where you're just saying something just to check the box or to just market yourself, and you or your staff are truly not inclusive.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was saying about Human Rights Campaign, basically.
And with in regards to Pride Month, how should vendors navigate using Pride Month to show that they're supportive, but not necessarily use it where, I'm sure you know where I'm going with this.
Oh yeah, that's a great question. Do you want to take that, Leigh?
Yes. So I'll be completely transparent in this and very candid. Oftentimes, because the LGBTQ community has more disposable income, they have been targeted by businesses to tap into that disposable income under the guise of being friendly or as a part of Pride, when in reality, it was just used to get a foot into the door to access people's dollars. It wasn't out of an altruistic request. So there has been a bit of fear around that into, you have a vendor that's like, oh, hey, let me do your Pride party. I'll do it for nothing, or I'll just sponsor it completely, or blah, blah, blah. When in reality, they were doing that to gain more business out of it, and weren't being completely transparent, and had no interest in actually helping the Pride community gain equality or get to equality. So as we enter into Pride Month, and this Pride Month is a little bit different because of the social environment that we're finding ourselves in, I would just be very mindful of your words, and probably celebrate Pride outside of the month of June. Do things to help the community outside of just the month of June. It becomes very clear when people throw up their rainbow flags and they're all about pride in June, and then it all comes down in July, and then it's business as usual after that.
Yeah.
So if you really, truly want to get involved in pride, make sure it's coming from an altruistic background, an altruistic point of view.
Yeah.
You know, it's very easy to look on your social and see if you really are inclusive or not.
And we see this even right here in St. Pete Pride. You know, I don't even know why we allow it, to be honest with you, but that's not my decision. You know, we see businesses all the time who have floats, they pop up, they come in and even walk in the Pride Parade, who are nationally known to be not LGBT inclusive. And it's great. Maybe the local ones are, and they're trying to go against that, but that's not usually the message. You know, it really is about the money and about being known really at that point, and being, you know, out so that people. And
it's noticed.
Yeah, very noticed.
It's very much noticed.
They get booed. Like it gets real bad.
Yeah. So someone, let's see, we have, going back a bit, I was told refer to everyone as a couple, but now you're saying not to refer to everyone as a couple. No, I'm saying refer to everyone as a couple. Just make sure that when you're talking about weddings, and you're not just referring to hetero weddings as regular weddings, whereas like a same-sex wedding is a same-sex wedding. It's all a wedding. So try to make sure, and this takes a little time, and Rome wasn't built in a day, and you have to do work on kind of retraining your brain, especially if you're not used to doing LGBTQ weddings. You know, work on being incredibly mindful of your words and your thought process when you're planning these weddings. So it's take your brain off of autopilot, because those of us that do plan weddings all the time, kind of gets a little easy, and you're just like, oh, yada, 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 all my brides. It's like, well, maybe you don't have brides. I don't have brides in October. I have grooms. So, but I still call them my couple. Unless we're besties, and then I just say my boys. But they know that, because we are besties. So, does anybody have any other questions? Hi, Anna. Yes, Kimberly, be in or out. That's the biggest thing. So don't just check the box. Be the person. Be the change. Be truly inclusive. So.
All right, well, I think that's everything. If anyone has any other questions later that you think of, or you want to ask it privately, you can always feel free to email it to me, and I'll forward it on to Leigh and Lucas, or you can ask me for their emails, and you can contact them. Thank you so much, Leigh and Lucas, for doing this, and thank you to Metro. This was really great. And again, this will be up for rewatch if you didn't get everything, probably in about 2 hours.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having us. And go follow us on social. We do a lot of really fun things throughout the year when events pick up again. But we're doing a lot of
Thank you so much.
I also just want to say quickly, we have our last Zoom seminar next Tuesday. It's on marketing from the Abundance Group. It is $10 for non-members and free for SWEL members. So go check that out on swelevents.com. It's listed there. All right.
Awesome. Thank you all so much for your time. Appreciate it. Take care. Stay safe. Bye.
What have you done today to make you feel proud? It's never too late to try.